My name is Nilmini, and this is Manal, and so we'll be facilitating today together. I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm speaking on Aboriginal land, that this land was never ceded, and at the very front of all my practice and everything I do, I keep the situation of Aboriginal peoples right in front of my thinking, because I think that's what we all as Australians need to do. So, okay, so today we're just going to... was anybody here? Okay, I'll just go through the learning objectives. First of all, what we wanted to do is to assist people to build an intersectional practice response. So we're talking about response in this context, in the AOD context, where intersecting issues, nothing ever happens on its own. Family violence, mental health trauma, and other forms of diversity are present. And what we're basically wanting to be able to do is, by the end of today, for you to be able to apply an intersectional framework in your practice, whatever that may be at whatever place you are. And very much a feminist empowerment method to recognise, respond, refer and reflect regarding family violence and intersecting issues, and to have a little practice at applying these frameworks in case studies and scenarios, which we hope you will develop yourselves. So we've got a room of experts here, and what's really important is we talk a lot about intersectionality, but not many people know how to do it. And often it's done badly or undone. The potential of it is undone. And we just sort of revert back to the usual. So that's kind of what I'll be covering today. So I have introduced myself, Nilmini Fernando. I'm working at the moment at Wire. I also do my own independent work. And I worked with Wire as a researcher and an educator on family violence, particularly to do with financial abuse. And I've just published a really exhausting report on financial abuse. So that can be found on our website. And Manal can introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, and acknowledge that they have over 65,000 years of strong connection to the land and the waterways, of which we are meeting today and we drink. So I'd like to pay my respect to the elders, past, present and emerging, and also acknowledge the beautiful people in this room and the expertise that come with you here. My name's Manal. I'm a freelancer counsellor in the North. I'm also got two hats today. I come with the Wire hat, which is I'm a team leader at Wire in the phone room and also a phone worker. And with Shark, I'm a psychoeducational support facilitator, which is peer support. That means every one of us has had either direct or indirect experience in the AOD industry. So I'll be talking about the feminist framework and how we might apply the feminist lens or model into our practices today. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just curious about, did anybody come to the session that we did a few weeks ago on intersectionality? Was anybody there from this room? Okay, so I won't be going that deeply into the theory and stuff like that, but I'll be bringing what I think is I suppose what I do differently about intersectionality. It's about combining a few different theoretical models in order to make a practice model. And everywhere you go, you get the complaint, intersectionality, yes, but we never talk about power. So my model is all about power. But once you start talking about power, people don't want to go there. Well, usually the CEO doesn't want to go there. But, so power is important. And it's not even all about, burning down the place, which is the common misperception. It's about once you can see power better, you can strategize about where the strengths and challenges are. That is fantastic. So here we are about identity. Everybody is so different. We can all work in the same sector, whatever. But the difference, I suppose, with identity is some things you get to choose and other things you don't. Some are forced. And some are ascribed, some are impossible to escape. Sometimes we have to fight for our own, to be able to name ourselves and frame our lives the way we want. So intersectionality for me is about all that. And I've written a whole thesis on it, so I'm not going to bore you with the whole thing. Just trying to pare it down. And what I've noticed is that everybody is at a different level of knowledge and understanding about what it is. It is becoming a buzzword. And I was living in Europe for a minute. It's already been around there. And it's, so it's just doing the rounds. Like everything else, I think it's a great idea, but it's been done, it's been undone, it's been torn apart, it's been misdone. So actually there's a lot of tensions and critiques within intersectionality, and one of my, I suppose, my dreams, my pet project would be to actually theorize it in the Australian context, because I think the answer and the problem are all in this room, and it's sort of bit by bit, there is no one great big solution. And even to look for it is actually, however, I'm not saying we shouldn't be guided by principles and theory, but people seek an easy way to understand complexity, and there actually isn't. So a lot of what we're going to do today is actually just think about, you're all experienced practitioners, and it's about how you can stay in the moment, and actually be aware of all the other things. What happens is if you're haven't touched on all the differences that can be happening, you might just be limited in the differences that you consider. Does that make sense? So opening it up and then just trying to be in the moment about when you're in front of somebody and thinking. So we've got a load of tools and papers and all kinds of things that can help you. But the main thing is just to, the core ideas, I suppose, of intersectionality. Actually, just a show of hands, who knows what it is? Okay, who knows what it is? Beautiful, so we've got 3 people. So am I to presume that all the rest of you don't know anything about it?
About intersectionality?
Yeah. Can I ask a question again? Who knows anything about it? All right, quite a few. So if you keep your hand up, who's at 101 out of that lot? Who's at 201?
What does that mean?
Okay, 101 means you know the word, you know roughly what it means. 201, maybe you've read a few articles. And 301, you've studied it, used it, you've read a lot about it, say. So 101. Okay, 201. Okay, and 301. Beautiful. Okay, so we've got a range of experts in the room, and we've got a range of different, and intersectionality is something that was born from lived experience. So it is exactly the same value as the theoretical experience of it. And as I said before, we're all at different levels of understanding, and it's about not just where you're at, but where you can take it next. And I find myself, one of the things about intersectionality is that, first I said that it's undone, it's done badly, it's done in a limited way. The potential of it is limited. And quite a lot of that is to do with race and feminism and all the other intersections around it. So I won't go through, I did go through that history before, and it is on the website, I think, if you want to have a little look about the origins of the concept, the third term, and the theory. Okay, so intersectionality, I've just got 2 simple definitions. It emphasizes that different dimensions of social life cannot be separated into discrete and pure strands. And intersectionality, this is Ruby Hamad, who I think has lovely work on it, illustrates how multiple forms of oppression meet. They create new and or compound existing oppressions for some people who belong to certain marginalized groups. It's always provisional, it's always relational, and it's always contextual, and it's a relational thing. So I could be in a marginalized situation in one situation, in another I could be in power. We are all both oppressors and oppressed in different things, but some differences matter more to some people. Okay, so that's the kind of idea about intersectionality. And you can read lots and lots about it. You will get into a lot of wars, cyber wars about it, call-outs, online pylons, the whole range. It's all there. Has anybody tapped into any of those? Not for yeah. Good thinking. Yeah, staying off it. Absolutely, absolutely. And actually, as a woman of color, I feel like I do need to defend it sometimes, because it gets taken away from your knowledge base, and it gets sort of, it gets diminished in its value. And I think part of that is because it's a woman of color's knowledge, and it doesn't fit the same scale of importance when compared to Western knowledge, and that's in the academy. You can really feel that. So a lot of the US critiques and the UK critiques will be about that. In Australia, of course, the people that we really need to listen to are Indigenous feminists, and Indigenous feminist theorists, and Indigenous people with lived experience, because everything is there. And we just need to build the knowledge up from there, which I think we tend to go to the US a lot, or other countries, and we don't really, it's really hard to look at the thing that's right in front of us. So, yeah. So, that's intersectionality, and so I think about it as a concept, a tool, a framework, and a practice. And believe me, there have been conferences where they're trying to work out, well, what is it? And an entire conference and a whole year's work will go on. It's all those things, okay? It's not a catch-all one. So as a concept, it evolved from slavery times. And it can be all those things. And today we're going to focus on it as a practice. And it's a lens that you can help you improve your practice when family violence is identified. And it's the aim of what we're doing with intersectionality today is to try and enact it, recognize, respond, refer, and reflect. So if you're all in different services and we're talking about bringing all the severed parts together, it's a holistic approach to a person's well-being. And, I think all our treatments and, have been disciplined apart a little bit. And I think that we're coming back to this idea, well, I don't know why we went away from it in the first place, but that we need to bring all those severed parts together. So that's the way I think about it. So in a way, that's physically in the room as well, people from different services coming together. And so could you just at your tables, can you just tell each other what you know about intersectionality, a little bit about what you know and then what you don't know? And then we can get back as a large group and just talk about that last one. So just a couple of minutes, 5 minutes. So am I hearing you right, that it's something you've been doing anyway, right? But not always from the top down, hasn't maybe always been acknowledged. And now it's been acknowledged, like all of you have to do it. So it's something like you've been doing anyway. But also now it's been recognized from the top down. You're being asked to do it, but a bit of me would probably feel a bit annoyed about that too. It's like, why wasn't it recognized when we were doing it anyway? There's all these little dynamics. So intersectionality is actually a political, it brings up political, and nobody likes politics, but every breath you take is political, and it's almost like a bad thing to be political, and I think that could be problematic because politics is about power dynamics. So I have noticed your hand up. So just the word that came to me as you were talking is a form of literacy. It's almost like when you're doing something and there's an elephant in the room, unless you've named it, it's like family violence, or unless you've named it, you don't have a way to talk about it. Therefore, all that difference is silenced. When something like difference, particularly race and gender and diversity, when difference is silenced, you have a lot more opportunity for racism and people to make what they want out of it. Does that make sense? So that's kind of how I see it. And that whole thing about it's not really there, it's in what is it? For me, it's a deconstructive tool. Quite often, what we believe to be the master story, the grand narrative, is what is wrong. And I think that intersectionality, for me anyway, the way I practice is it's an undoing. It's an undoing of what we think we know. So exactly that for me, that idea that we're focusing on the person, that's very good. But again, I'm a deconstruction person, right? When you're focusing on one thing, what are the 10 other things people don't want you to see? You're not able to see, you haven't got time to see, etc. So that's what I mean by power. So when I was, this is the model. Actually, we'll get to that question in the later exercise about how you'd like it to work better for you. I think we should move on a little bit. And I developed this in my master's, but also in my, Patricia Hill Collins is a black feminist scholar, and she developed what she calls a matrix of domination. So intersectionality shows us all the oppressions and that intersect, but the matrix of power shows you how they are organized. And so I always find we just get to that first step, okay, we know it's intersectional, we list off, multiple identities, we're this, we're that, but what do we do with it? What does it actually even mean? So we never go to that next step, and that's where I think it's underusing the potential of it. So this is Patricia Hill Collins's map, and I did my PhD research with asylum-seeking women from African continent, and I mapped onto this power all the things. I got their stories. I asked, we did actually through theatre and whatever, but from their stories, I mapped all the people that were involved in their scene, in their life, and some of it was structural power, some of it was cultural power, some of it was disciplinary power, and that all impinged on their interpersonal power. So Patricia Hill Collins talks about those 4 forms of power that occur over every situation of oppression. Okay, so you can find them in different levels and degrees. So just to run you through that, structural power is quite self-explanatory. It's the rules, top-down, hard power. It's the law, the economy, policy, immigration rules, which really dictate, who can come, who can't come, how can you come, and so on. Police, courts, it's that power over. And I think in Australia, settler colonization, the entire structure is built on a settler colonial structures. And I don't think people who are privileged maybe might realize that even, all of us are under that. We think it only affects maybe Aboriginal people or migrants, but actually it's affecting all our, anyway. So then and so that's structural power. Cultural power is huge as well. It's the attitudes, beliefs, values of dominant culture, and it's all the sanctioned sexist myths and misogyny that float around. Race, class bias, the patriarchal, the bro code, religious beliefs, education, mass media, publishing, films and music. So all that is culture. So we produce culture, but also what we produce tells us how we are. So we drink a lot of coffee in Melbourne, suddenly Melbourne is the cafe, you know, it's the coffee place. See, people think that culture is just there, we actually produce it, but also culture can be produced to make us obedient to it. So it's always a dynamic thing. Does that make sense? And that's something called performativity. It's like when you say something's going to be there, you end up only being able to see yourself, or, you know, it's just the frames that describe you anyway. I won't go on. Individual differences, we know what they are. So I think what we're doing is only in this bit. We never look outside that. Does that make sense? So the good way to explain it is the 99% and the 1%. You know about the economy that 99% of people own. What we're doing is fighting among the 1%. For the scraps. For me, that's how I feel about it. We're not even looking at all those other things. So this is a model to keep it all in your head, and just to know that it's there. It's not necessarily we'll find an answer. We belong in this disciplinary domain of power, which is we're the soft power. So for Patricia Hill Collins, this is where we organize, manage, and dispense that oppression, or that, you know, we actually enact what the rules are. They may not look like that. So not-for-profits, we organize, manage, and enact oppression. And we control and disempower people through our bureaucracy, through surveillance, having to answer, you know, loads of questions about yourself, having to out yourself when you don't want to, not knowing what's going to happen with your data. And, but we are also controlled, ourselves controlled, regulated, and divided, say competitive funding and things like that, having to put in tenders. So we are also controlled and divided by the structural power. So there's, you know, that's all happening at the same time. So any questions or thoughts about that? I talked about this in a bit more detail last time, but anything you want to talk about before we move on? Does that feel like it's right, or does it feel like it makes sense? Okay, so great, okay. So what I did was in the family violence situation, I just did that map for a particular person that I think we would all understand all these things. If you remember the case of Julia Cadu, who was killed she died in custody a few years ago, a young Aboriginal woman of 22 years old. So if we look at the different powers that were in operation, the structural power, she was a family violence victim survivor. And that was on record, but then she was arrested for fines. The state laws allowed her to be arrested and to be imprisoned for those fines, because they passed a law that if you can't afford the money, you can do the time. So that's the structural realm. She was held in police custody, so that's another structural power that was in that situation. Cultural power, what was believed about her were the gender stereotypes and the race stereotypes and the stereotypes about Indigenous people. So right from the get-go, it was all about she's a drug abuser, she's faking, she's lying, she's got behavioral issues, all that pathologizing of her illness. You know, she wasn't a well person. And that this whole idea that all those things make women's truths, and particularly women of color's truths, and particularly Aboriginal women's truths, sort of unbelievable, less grievable. That makes you think, dehumanizing to the point where we think, well, they deserve pain, or they don't feel the same amount of pain. So, and all that stereotypes dominated her own voice when she said, I can't stand, I can't walk, my pain is number 10. So all that dominated that. So then the disciplinary cultural power, this is where I think most of the stuff actually happened that she died in. There's a little subsection going on here of gender power, where there's 2 white police officers, white Australian. The sergeant told the female constable that she was a junkie and she was faking illness. And the female policeman appeased him because his word was law. He was it sounds to me like a bit of a bully, without, you know, defaming him here. He has in the past verbally attacked. So there's that gender dynamic between them, that hierarchy between them. So she didn't question him, she didn't report the comments because nobody asked her. So these are all the excuses and the sort of denials, I suppose, that can happen around that. And then the health professionals. And I want to make the point here that women's bodies, men's bodies, migrant doctors' bodies, all our bodies are capable of doing these sort of things. So it's not about whether we are all capable of doing racism and doing sexism. So the first doctor said that her pain was real, but it was exaggerated. And again, behavioral gain. So you see right through that whole attitude and the bias that's going all the way through that story, and declared her fit for custody. 3 times she was taken to hospital, 3 times she was declared fit for custody. And then the triage nurse, again, mentioned it could be withdrawal from drugs. And the Dr. Wafa Nadiri, I think maybe Egyptian, I'm not sure, he had seen her the night before, took an actual ultrasound of her chest, discharged her with a paracetamol tablet, and said she was fit for custody, again, telling that story again, behavioral issues, drugs. So can you see how all the different powers intersect, and how, in this case, as an Aboriginal woman, the triple jeopardy of her location, not her identity, but her social location, gender, race, and indigeneity, diminished her interpersonal power to the point of death. So that's kind of the worst end. So we've got a spectrum. So does that make it a little more clear how we could use these maps and read them? Any comments? Yeah, it's pretty heavy. Every time I think about it, it just stays with you. And that's why I talk about it. I don't know if you know Kimberly Crenshaw's Say Her Name, because there's always, intersectionality is very much about, it's from the embodied knowledge of slavery. Women whose bodies were bred, who were laboring, who were raped, it's kind of came from that, the idea of your body is an exploitable thing. So it's actually all the way through, it's about women's bodies and about women of bodies, colours bodies. So I'm very strong, and I think and Kimberly Crenshaw, all the Black Lives Matter, we're really focusing on male boys, and a lot of black girls get expelled from school. Black girls were lynched, black girls get killed by police too. So we're saying her name. So I know it's uncomfortable and it's really painful, but if we don't say it, then we're like the silence. So yeah. So that's my lot on intersectionality. And Manal is now going to talk to you. Maybe just take a moment. Does anybody want to say anything? Respond to that in any way? Yes, you can. It's a bit tricky because I'm actually publishing it next year and there's little copyright things and everything. But you can have it, but it can't be circulated. And also a lot of the things I put up, like pictures and stuff, I haven't referenced them. And, you can take a photo, but please don't circulate it. And please don't steal it from me. Citation is such an important thing in Black knowledge. You've got to cite. None of what I know comes from me. It's all because my sisters, foremothers have gone before me. And yeah, even just now, I'm a single mother, and I've just sort of, struggled right through my thesis and to survive and support my son and everything. And I haven't had time to publish my stuff. So I have an intersectional story, about my own life. And then you sort of start talking about your work. And then suddenly you find that people might want to take it from you. You have to be a little careful. And so what I would say right now is that you're welcome to use it. If you want to learn about it, hire me to come and talk to you about it. It's what I do, it's my job, and it would really help. So I'm sorry for making it so blatant, but otherwise it's just history, you know what happens. Yeah, I spent 8 years doing this work, so yeah. So you're very welcome to use it, but if you circulate it, there could be a problem with the publisher next year. So that's all. But I'm so glad that it's working, because this is what we have needed, a way to map it and to actually use it so that we don't misuse it. Okay, thank you.
So I'm very conscious of the expertise in the room, and that we've already spoken a lot about the fact that we are doing some type of intersectionality in our work, even though we didn't have the language for it. But it's sort of coming up as buzzwords now, intersectionality and, complex needs and multi-layered and all this type of language. I want to start by saying I do understand that when we talk about family violence, and given the time, we're not going to go through the broader definition and whatnot, there are groups in the room that are underrepresented, and I guess the language does not really represent, especially in the AOD mental health sector. It is not, whilst family violence is not gender neutral, in the AOD I beg to think it's a little bit different with regards to the cycle and how it plays out and what family types we talk about. So if you don't like something I say, put your hand up and correct me. I am not standing here in a position of expertise. I'm here to learn, and I guess what I want to say is that we all have different tools in our toolbox, and I'm here to share and swap and give away some of those tools. Okay, alrighty. So, definition of family violence. Family violence, domestic violence, same thing, includes a wide range of abusive behaviours where intimidation, coercion, fear is used against another family member. And so when we talk about intimate family, we talk about children and siblings, we talk about spouses, de facto partners, ex-spouses, non-spousal, same-sex, even caregivers, and extended families, depending on the cultural group that we're talking about. Okay. All right. So like I said, family violence is not a gender-neutral issue. The evidence clearly shows that women are subjected to family violence more frequently than men, and that men are more likely than women to use violence in their relationships. Women are also more likely than men to express fear and suffer injuries as a result of relationship violence. Just quickly, some of the stats. At least one woman a week dies of family violence by intimate male partner, present or past. On average, 2 women a week are hospitalised with serious brain or body injury. 1 in 3 women have been physically or sexually abused by past or present intimate partner. 95%, I guess everyone can read that. I don't need to read that. Not everyone in the room has family violence in their portfolio. So the power and control wheel. Some of the abuse that is used, some of the behaviours that are used, emotional, intellectual, financial, threats to kill pets or destroy property, psychological abuse, physical, verbal, spiritual, using parts of text or tradition to keep a woman in a relationship or to stop her from any religious practices, I guess. Cyber abuse is not up there. That's quite prevalent these days. People using, I guess, spyware, mobile phones to hack into emails, to stalk women and to hack into their emails, phones, watch where they're going, what they're doing, etc. So sometimes even putting them in children's toys, they're only about $20, $30 to get these days. So that's quite scary. Now, with regards to family violence, and this is, if we're talking about family violence only, then this cycle is applicable. Research has shown that there is a certain cycle of abuse with the women that were surveyed. Over 20,000 women were surveyed, and there was some sort of consistency with the way tensions build up. Then there's the incident of the physical abuse, the verbal, or what have you. There's a reconciliation phase, a honeymoon phase. It's not always linear, and with time, it sort of the cycle goes a lot faster, I guess, and builds up a lot quicker. However, in the AOD industry, this doesn't always play out the way it does because of, I guess, we'll get to the other slide in a minute. So relationship between AOD and family violence, yeah. So I guess the link is that AOD in the alcohol and drug industry, with things like ice, alcohol, it's unpredictable. Violence can come from both male, female, it can come from siblings, it can be upline, it could be spontaneous, it's erratical, it's irrational. There isn't anything that we can't say it's gendered per se, because it could happen at any time with anyone. You can get quite violent young girls to the parents or to her partner and vice versa. So a person with propensity to be aggressive when under the effect generally can also be quite aggressive when they're sober as well. A drinking context that allows aggressive acts to be played out, and a culture tolerant of AOD-related aggression. I mean, if we just have a look at the ads on TV and how we promote drinking of alcohol, etc., at certain events, social settings, and all of that. However, I'd like to say that, or just call out that not all men who have AOD issues use violence in their relationships, and sometimes men are themselves subject to family violence in that context. Substance use is not a cause or excusing factor for family violence. Substance abuse is frequently associated and co-occurring with incidences of violence, and it can increase the risk or severity of the experience. Prevalence of co-occurring of AOD and family violence. So between 50% to 90% of women accessing mental health or AOD services have been victims of child or domestic abuse. International research states that over 3/4 of men in the AOD treatment have used emotional, physical or sexual violence towards their partner. And of course, historically, in the AOD industry, there was a big failure to recognise or address family violence issues, even to try and recognise it. Whereas now it's sort of changed quite a lot, and a lot of organisations are employing family violence officers in the AOD sector and mental health in order to work not in silo of these issues, but to understand that there's a prevalence of underlying family violence in quite a lot of I think it was like over 90% of people presenting have had some form of family violence. It's almost like what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did family violence cause people to go into AOD, go to alcohol and substance abuse? Or was that, substance abuse and that led to family violence? Some reasons why people stay in a relationship: the fear of the violent party's threat or behaviour, fear of stalking or abduction, loss of AOD supply, isolation or rejection from community, friends and family. Of course, financial dependence is a really big one that Nilmini touched on. Negative impacts on children, such as loss of schools and friends, grief for the loss of the relationship, feeling guilty, self-blame, fear of losing children or having children removed. Can anyone think of anything else? Actually, at Family Drug Help, which is part of SHARC, we offer support for families because we get calls. It's a 24-hour family drug helpline. It's a 24-hour line. And we are addressing these very core issues where elderly abuse is, or parent abuse is quite rampant and usually goes unnoticed because parents don't want to talk about their children, parents don't want to call the police on their children, and the children use that as a leverage to keep that cycle, taking money off them or staying in the house and whatnot. And we offer support groups at SHARC actually to help parents and family members keep open communication with their loved ones living in the home or out of the home, and giving them strategies and tools like how to put in place boundaries, how to keep themselves safe. So we talk about safety plans, giving them resources and tools, boundaries, I statements, and how to keep that communication open in helping them to make healthier choices and not enabling them with their use. So we have programs, 6-week, 8-week, 2-week, yeah. So we can talk about that later, but it is something that is slowly being addressed. I can't say that there's advertising and it's everywhere. People have to navigate a very hard system in order to find these resources. Yeah, just like even until recently, in the support groups I run, parents, grandparents are so frustrated because their loved one presents with mental health issues and AOD, obviously aggression. That's why they're coming out to speak. They're looking for help because their behaviour is affecting affecting them, and it's like they're being bounced around like a ping pong ball between services, because AOD is saying, well, fix your mental health first and then come to us, and then AOD is saying, well, we can't deal with people with AOD, go get yourself on a recovery journey first and then come to us. So I guess today is about, yes, we are moving forward, maybe at a very slow rate. It's how can we as an individual front-end worker recognise these intersectionalities, look out for cues, how to ask the right questions in order to help this person as best we can. Given the systemic structures around KPIs and all these other barriers, that time management, how can we navigate that? And this will come after the break. This is just pretty much setting the scene of not the doom and gloom, but the barriers and the issues that, people face when they come into your presence. And you might be that very first person on the phone or face-to-face where they've taken a lot of courage to come and meet you. And it could be their first and only experience, or they've built up the courage coming from a lousy experience to try one more time. How are you going to be able to work with these people to make sure that they have a positive experience? That people's experience play a big part. Going to the police, it depends on the police officer, the first point of contact, how they treated you. The judge, how did he speak to that person? The doctor, all of these can be traumatic or it could be positive. But how do we get that story? We've got to hear that story to help. And it will take time. It will take time, yeah. And every community has its issues, and I'm not talking just about communities as in ethnicities or religious groups, but also the police, the legal profession. At the end of the day, they're made of humans and everyone errs. Everyone makes mistakes and everyone has their racism and everyone has their form of biases. And it's about being conscious of your own bias and being able to park it whilst you're hearing their story, giving them a chance to tell you what their story is. So these are some of the, I'm just thinking we're sort of, yeah, I know, but I just got here, yeah. Okay, some family violence scenarios in the AOD setting. So again, it plays out a bit differently to normal family violence, the type of calls we get at Shark. Shark is a self-help addiction centre. So just in case you don't know what that means, a family drug help. And what we get at Wire are a little bit different. Women talking about family violence in general and people that are actually going through hell because of their loved one's AOD use. So it could be an adult son living at home and using ice, waiting for dad to leave home so he can harass mum for money. Women feeling pressured to have unprotected sex with their partners. And again, it's saying women, I want to apologise. It's not really gender sensitive, these slides, and perhaps I'm going to have to adapt them and change them. So I acknowledge that and I'm apologising because in AD it's not women, men specific. Okay. Partners being used, asked to withhold money to prevent drug use or gambling, then actually intimidating and harassing that person to give them money in order to go buy drugs or to drive them around or whatnot. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Adult children and partners threatening suicide as a way to coerce family members, or saying things like, the dealer's going to injure me, you need to give me money, I'm going to be on the street tonight. Parents driving around at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, picking up their kids, answering harassing phone calls. Yeah, we said that one, using drugs with them, or partners dealing or with giving out or withholding drugs as a way to, to control their loved one. So I'm sure a lot of you would have come across a lot of this in your workplace setting. Okay, problem AOD used by the person subjected to family violence can cause impaired judgment, reduced capacity to implement safety strategies, increased level of dependence on an abusive partner, reduced ability or desire to seek help from police, possibly due to shame or memory loss. Violence will be believed or taken seriously by police. Increase the likelihood that they will be blamed for the violence experience. Increase the risk of losing custody of their children. So they might not even speak about it and just put up with it. And sometimes, I know at Wire, with all that frustration and people trying, having tried the system themselves and tried to be as resourceful as they can, navigating through the system and being knocked back from one place to another place to another place. Over 60% of the callers we get at Wire are just there to have that conversation, just to open up and let it out and be validated and whatnot. Over 60% do not actually access the referrals we've given them at Wire. It's so important that contact, that human-to-human aspect, without the paperwork, without the assessment tool, helps keep them grounded, whoever that may be. So the effects of family violence on children. So family violence is a form of child abuse, whether the children experience the violence directly or not. It affects the safety, stability and development of unborn children, infants and young people, and causes them developmental, neurological, relational, physical and emotional harm. It doesn't matter how positive the perpetrator or the person choosing that behaviour interacts with the children, they cannot be called a good parent, because quite often, again, whether it's Wire or Shark, whether we get someone presenting in person or on the phone, victim survivors or what have you tend to minimise and tend to always say, but they're great with the children. Might be bad towards me, but they're just fantastic parents. Or how could there be parents if they're subjecting the children to that behaviour toward their partner? For every adult seeking AOD treatment, there is generally one child impacted by problematic parental AOD use. When I say problematic, and I guess the context of alcohol and drug in every one of these slides is not the experimental or social. We're talking dependency, we're talking addiction. That's when the behaviours start to impact their own health or other people around them. Usually extended family members such as grandparents and some significant other jump in to take care of the children. And there are no stats documenting this unless child protection services or other government bodies intervene. A Victorian study found that amongst parents involved in substantial cases of child neglect, approximately 1/3 had problems with alcohol, 1/3 had other drug problems, more than half have experienced family violence, and 19% have had a psychiatric disability. This is from the Community Care Division, Victorian Government Department of Human Services information. So I guess working with children, and there are some people here that do work with children, how do we get this to surface? You know, how do we look at someone presenting and be thinking about what could be going on for this child? What could be going on? Where's the trauma coming from? What's been going on with the family? Did they have to be an adult all of a sudden at the age of 10 looking after their parents? You know, is it that's why they're so quiet or they're neglected? Just to be thinking about what's going on and how to ask questions regarding this.
I just wanted to say one thing. I've just listened to 350 women who've experienced family violence in the last research, and so many of them have told me how the child assessment is done. I've sat in rooms with the Child Protection Agency and understanding their rules and regulations. We're talking about an interview about abuse done with the perpetrator sitting on the same sofa, half an hour, look at the child. Nothing is
ever done properly, and more women, and when you're looking at the statistics, 80% of women don't report because they lose their children. And there's so many machinations, and it goes from income levels, higher income levels, fight them in the court, they actually invent, a mental illness, and it is a gendered issue when it comes to mothers of those children. And the phishing that lawyers do in child protection cases and the phishing that goes on. I mean, knowing all that side of it as we do from Wire, extremely cautious about information sharing because of everything that history has told us about what gets done to women.
A lot of work needs to happen.
And and also, I was just thinking this morning when I was getting ready. I thought, well, would you trust the state that's done that with this? And I personally, as a person of colour, I wouldn't. As I took myself off the My Health, speaking very frankly, don't take this, but I took myself off all that because I don't trust that, for me, it will be used fairly. So do you know what I'm saying? So I'm sorry for going on, but we have had so many stories. And that the filters that we asked for, Wire put in a lot of submissions for the filters, none of those have been done. I know it's all going to be careful, but it is still about power.
Just while you're at your tables, you can keep drinking your tea and whatever. We'd just like you to generate, at each table, a case study of a very complex case study. A person with many levels of diversity. It could be somebody that you've worked with, that you can put together, and maybe not take too long, because I'm sure you've got a lot. And then we're just going to do an exercise. So the only two things to decide what this client is like, and is your meeting an initial assessment, or is it somebody you've already worked with? Okay, so at different times of your engagement with them. So just a couple of minutes to make up a client. That's so good that you want to keep talking. I sometimes wish we had more time. How did you all get on with that? Are you kind of done? You've worked out some of the barriers, and what we'd like you to do is just to park that, and we're going to just go through now. Manal's going to take you through. The Wire model is something that we often in Wire on the phone, it takes about 20 minutes. So usually the calls last about 20 minutes. Within that 20 minutes, we have shifted that person from a place of disempowerment to a place of empowerment. So what we're saying is the Wire model is so effective for moving people to see things in a different way very, very quickly. So that's why we're going to show it to you, just bits of it today. And that's obviously not, some of the elements will cross over with your professional practice, if it's counselors or therapists or whatever. But there is something about the feminist empowerment framework that getting a person to sit, and I'll explain to you. So we're going to just do that now, and then we'll go back to the case studies, and we'll do more with that.
Okay. So the Wire model is working with the feminist framework, person-centered, strength-based feminist framework, and it's about centering the women, or I guess because I'm talking Wire, and Wire is the Women's Information Referral Exchange, but I guess centering your client as the expert in their own life. So our hope is that the client is leading their own journey, and we're just there to support them get to where I guess they want to go. So hearing the story, opening up the story, similar to Shark. Shark deals with men and women. We're still using the feminist framework, person-centered, strength-based. It's quite critical because it's about not only opening up the story, but validating their feelings, validating their experience, validating their strengths, etc. And it's not just about phone workers, it's about that person coming into your contact, coming into your presence the first time, being conscious of the physical space as well as anything else. So if someone coming into an office and I've got a big desk and I'm sitting on a leather chair and they're sitting on a little wooden chair, what does that say about power dynamics? What kind of walls are you putting in that straight away when they walk in? Think about someone from any minority group, whether it's culturally and linguistic diverse background, someone that's from LGBTQI plus community, someone with a disability, looking at that paperwork sitting in front of you and thinking, oh my God, they're going to ask me all these questions. What are they going to do with that paperwork? These are some of the things that will be going through that person's head. How is that information going to be used? So both Wire and Shark are committed to connection, connection, connection. I understand, according to some of your workplace practices, management and some of the systemic pressures, I guess, would be trying to meet quotas, trying to meet KPIs, time poor. It doesn't take long to build rapport. I spoke to one DHS worker that labelled their interaction with consumers as transactions. But you get so much anger in these spaces because people don't have a chance to express who they truly are. Whereas if you give a minute, someone else said to me, Manal, it took 1 minute. An old man came into my office. He just wanted to tell me how lousy his tram ride was coming here. And I took the time to listen. And that just opened up a whole new opportunity. So it's about using your intuition and your ability to make that connection. They say 7% is the words that you use. 38% is the body language and facial expression, that type of communication. And the rest, the 41 or whatever it is about the tone of voice and the variance in your voice. But 7% is literally the words that come out of your mouth. How are you meeting that person? A smile is the universal hello. Everyone understands a smile. It doesn't matter what language you're speaking in. So creating a safe space, looking at the physical, I guess, aspects of the room that you're meeting them in. I'm going to challenge the thinkings around doing an assessment or using the assessment tool straight away. I mean, can't we park it for a little bit, for a couple of minutes or a few minutes to say, hey, I acknowledge the fact that I might be in a place of privilege, the fact that I'm sitting here, the fact that I'm interviewing you. I acknowledge that, just like I did with you guys in the room. I acknowledge the fact that there are many people that are probably a lot better experienced than myself up here, but we're here to share the journey. I'm here to learn from your toolbox just as much as, you're here to learn from me. We just have different tools, and we're here to move together on this journey. Being empathic, clarifying, listening, not everyone. That eye contact thing doesn't work with all groups. You've got to realise the person in front of you. Eye contact, you might want to put your chair beside them rather than in front of them because that might be intimidating. So being open and aware to these type of dynamics is quite important. The story. So how do we get the story opening up? I guess asking, what made you come today? What's going on in your life? Listening. A lot of people will need a lot more probing than just those couple of questions. Someone might say, oh, look, my partner gets angry if I turn the TV up. Well, what does anger look like? Explain to me. Because love to me will mean one thing and to you it will mean something else. Anger to you will mean one thing and it'll mean something else. So we explore these possibilities through, I won't say probing, but exploring what language means to them. Because as we know, if someone says, meet me here at 10 to 10, for me it'll mean one thing. For another group of people it might literally mean 10 to 10. Or it might be 10 a.m. between 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. Yeah, depending on who you're talking to. Clarifying. Validation. When we talk about validation, the feminist model is to acknowledge that it's okay to be feeling lousy. It's okay to be feeling angry or upset given what you're going through. Sometimes that's all it takes. Sometimes it's talking about systemic pressures. Vicky Reynolds says when someone says depression, well, I say it's oppression. You know, so sometimes it depends on the person in front of you, their level of understanding of the oppressions, the patriarchal system, and all of that comes into play. It's up to you to understand and meet your client where they're at and simplify your language. Lots of clarifying. Let them know that they are being heard. Now, at Wire, most often than not, the women, once you ask, how are you feeling? Or that must feel horrible. Once you bring it to the feelings and emotions, my God, that's when the woman usually cries, or when she opens up and just tells you her whole story. When you take it off that formality radar and personalise it. Really important to build that connection. And it might be that you might have to go to management and say, well, I can't do a 20-page assessment in the first meeting. I don't know. Maybe I'll get it, you know, over the next 2-3 meetings or something. But imagine how much more honest that client will be when you've built that rapport. Have you used methamphetamines or something? They might straight away say no, because you haven't built that connection. But if you've built that connection, they will disclose, they will open up. There's a trust thing happening. And sometimes ruptures will happen in that connection. There will be disconnections sometimes, but that's okay, because that's learnings for both, and that's a chance to connect again, acknowledge that disconnection. Something happened, I felt something happened for me, and I'm wondering if that happened for you as well. And it's a chance to open up and talk about it. And you're bringing in that human element, that you're not claiming to be a perfect, you're not claiming to be an expert. And they're just as important in the room as you are. The peer model is actually letting you, apart from acknowledging the privilege or acknowledging the privilege of you being in a position, a privileged position more than they are, gives them hope as well. That you were at one stage sitting on that side of the desk, and now you're on this side. And that gives them a sense of hope. You've been on your journey, and we get that at Shark a lot. We want to get to where you are. How many of you understand when I say peer, what that means? Yeah? So you've got a lived experience, a shared experience that they can talk to. What else was I going to talk about? Peer support. Parking your biases and prejudice. We all say we don't have it in this industry, but we all really do. I go into Wire or Shark and with a white slate. Like I said, I might not look at the report or the clinician report or whatever that may be. I might just, I go in there with a stick figure in my head, and I allow them to tell me what is it in their identity that is important to them. And I will work with that. And if there's something I don't understand, I'll ask. I don't understand about this part of your religion or your faith. Can you teach me? Can you explain that to me? And people love that, because you're coming from a place of curiosity, a place where you want to grow and learn as well, and you're there for them. You want to make this the best experience you can for them. And that's what people get through Wire or Shark on the phone, that validation that you're there, and you're not there to fix it, because we can't fix anything. But you're there to offer your support the best way you know how, and asking them, inviting them, which way they want to go. What do they recognise as their priority? And reflecting back to them constantly, because that reflection is not advice from you, it's letting them hear what they're in. If it's family violence, you might get a lot of resistance. A lot of women don't want to label it as violence, even if it's physical. They resist naming it or labelling it as violence. So how do you gently hold these people that are not ready, but get them to that stage? And again, sometimes it's just by clarifying, paraphrasing, reflecting, maybe bringing in, well, you know what? A lot of women that call us have had similar experiences, and this cycle sounds a bit similar to what you're going through. Does that sound familiar? And again, they identify with something that they first thought was their own. It was something that was only unique to them. They were isolated. But then you've normalised it. And that means so much to people, that they're not alone and they're not experiencing this on their own. Other people have gone through it as well. And that's where the power lies. That gives them strength and a chance to talk about, well, you know what? Yeah, actually, this does happen. He only pulled my arm. Or she only, yells at me when she wants money. Or they go into my purse, when I'm asleep. I have to hide my keys. So why do you do all of this stuff? Why is this happening? And you're giving them a chance to talk and you're exploring, and then you have to call it out. If it's family violence, we do call it out. We might start off gently and talking around it, but within 20 minutes of that phone call, if you've identified it, well, you know what, in Australia, this is called family violence, and this is what it looks like. And these are some of the traits that come with it. Sometimes they'll only talk about the physical or sexual, but once you start mentioning financial abuse, they must say, well, you know what, I do, he can or she can go and buy, 2 packets of cigarettes a week, but I have to beg for a $5 coffee or $4 coffee. And it's like, okay, so let's talk about that a bit. The calls at Wire usually wind around between about 15 minutes average, 15 to half an hour on average. But the framework itself, by the time you open up the story, clarify, reflect, paraphrase, validate, in the middle of that as well, we tend to put every call on hold, because there's usually a team in the room, and we debrief and we talk with the supervisor as the best supports for this person, and that gives her a chance or them a chance to reflect on what's going on in their life, what they've heard, what direction they want to go, and it also gives the worker, the person taking the call or whatever, a chance to get the best resources. If the worker was thinking about a certain direction, or the supervisor might have said, well, you know what, they're actually cut off, they're quite isolated. They're thinking of family violence services or legal aid or something. I'm thinking social groups, counselling or something as well. Why don't you offer them that as well? Get back to the call. We validate their strengths. We look at what they've already done for themselves, how strong they've been thus far, how they've kept themselves thus far. Offer them referrals, and I usually check out with self-care. So what are you doing after we hang up today? What are you doing for yourself? Some might say, I'm washing the dishes and getting ready for the kids to come home. Well, that's not self-care. What are you doing for you? Do you have a favourite book to read? Do you do yoga? Do you go for a walk? And more often than not, they say, no one's ever asked me about that.
I just wanted to add a couple of things. One of them is like this morning when I said, say something about yourself. You chose that, right? That last thing. So in a way, like it sounds, I'm so happy you said what you said, because the why model is really, really effective. And it's effective because it's feminist. And because it's simple in the sense of, it could even seem, it's not rocket science to do it, but it is really hard to do that as a professional, because it almost seems too naive or too basic. And like, for example, many women will ring Wire after they've had a bad experience elsewhere. It's also the case that many women first ever identify family violence through a 20-minute phone call when they haven't been able to do it for maybe 10, 15 years. So what does that tell you? So I think it's very important to understand that the disempowerment of women through gender and other bodies through gender and through all the other intersecting differences, the disempowerment is vast. And actually, it's not saying that even just asking for that person to name and frame their experience has a massive impact on how they will receive the next thing you're going to tell them. So most of that issue is getting person to a place. And one of the main things that really works for women, the two things that I've trained like maybe, 250 people with this. And the main thing everybody loves is open questions. We think we know how to do it. We think we're really good at it. But actually, when it comes to the crunch, we forget, so open questions and validation. Now, there are a few other steps to the model. Our workers train for 9 weeks to practice this, and then they also have observed clinical practice for another 3 months after. So it's a long training. So but those two elements of it, I think we'd really like for you to have a go at practicing. And now we're not saying that you're not experienced clinicians, you're amazing, but actually try to use the phrasing that we give you. And once you do that, you can see for yourself how very, very quickly and effectively it works. So we often go to do phone, we do call center training and so on because it's such an effective model. And so the feminist framework, one of the main things that really helps women is to know that there are systems against you, because the first thing they will do is blame themselves. It's because I didn't stick up for myself. It's because me. The minute you say, yes, women don't earn as much as men, or we get a lot of women who are calling in with exactly this, and we call it family violence. And I used to be nervous about saying, I would have thought people might get upset or I'm pathologizing them even more with another label. It's always palpable relief. Oh, wow. So it's not just me. And then once you've got to them to that point, so that pointing out the structural gender dynamics of society is one of the main key things that helps women with family violence to start their journey to recovery. Does that all make sense? So the feminist framework is very, very crucial to the Y model. So what we're going to want you to do is, and I'm just going to flick back to this. This is a new slide from the new research that we've done. We thought the journey of family violence is not linear, and at any point they can go back onto that cycle, and they can meet you, you can meet them at any point in that cycle. So the message being that whenever you encounter that person, whether they're on their third abusive relationship or their first or they're 60, still ask that question and open up and name and frame family violence so that people can name it, because it makes an enormous difference for them to actually break that cycle. Is that okay? So we're looking at the stages that we meet, and at every stage there's a teachable moment. And we also say up to 99% of women who seek family violence formal services have experienced financial abuse, 99. So any particular sign of depression, we're telling doctors, depression, stress, and financial stress have been uniquely linked with economic abuse. So and it's actually the impacts of financial abuse can be far worse and long-term than the impacts of physical abuse. So this is all just emerging data. And so we're saying basically anyone who's under financial stress, we're educating utilities, banks and healthcare professionals, any sign of financial stress, it's good to ask that money question and try to sort of unravel any of the power dynamics that are going on. And also depression is uniquely correlated with financial abuse. So we're going to practice now using the Y model. So in your groups, now let's see, you've got 1, 2, 3. So what we really want is for you to open a conversation with that person, the client that you made up before. Open the conversation and practice validation using the phrases that we've told you. So we're going to put them there. Does everybody know what I mean by an open question? Yeah? Okay. Anyone not know? Okay. So we need to get in groups of at least 3. So can we start with just groups of 3, 1 observer and 2 people to role play? Second thing is have a go at just validating their experience. Okay, so what does validation mean? When you validate, I know you're not, it's just in what we mean by validating. What's worked for you before? Number one thing is what has worked for them before, because a woman who's survived family violence has spent years protecting and saving her own life. And the reason she hasn't left is because she could die from leaving. So what you've got to do is really recognize they have worked very hard to manage their safety. And there's no point going to them saying, why didn't you leave? Which is what most of them get. You must have chosen to stay. So validating everything she has done to protect herself and stay alive for all this time. So validation, that's one of the biggest validations you can give. All the things that she has done to manage, that she has called into you, really, really small goals. And now you've met her and talked to her a little bit. It's about what she thinks is valuable. She'll say, well, at least I got my kid a birthday present. She says, oh, you seem to care a lot about, you seem to be very conscious. You know, you seem to be a very attentive mother. That's a validation. So pick up clues from what's important to her. So have a go at just carrying on that conversation for a little bit longer and making sure that you do the validation. And the person who's been the client, just pay attention to what happens in your body, and then we can come back and feedback. We've only got you through those 2 phases, but we can do more training for you.
Bringing in the human element, that's what we're trying to achieve here today, is to be very conscious and aware of what might be going on to the person sitting in front of you or on the phone, and let them share their story and own it when you've made a mistake. It's okay. And that actually builds the relationship as well. And it's all about that relational stuff, that interpersonal stuff. And again, that goes back to your organisation and their policy and procedure, how much time they allow for that. We understand this is a mock call-up or you know, a scenario type thing. And things don't happen in the first, I mean, wonderful things can happen in that first moment, absolutely. It's how we build on that and go forward from there.
I've just got 2 little things to say, relational versus transactional. You know, for me, that's the key. It's not a transaction, it's a relationship. And power dynamics, if you keep remembering that, you know they're always shifting and changing and you just move with it. Second thing is, what's all this got to do with intersectionality? That's going to be the finishing thing. How do you put what you've just experienced in with intersectional frame? And then we can just, Naomi will finish it off and check you all out. But have a little think of what you've learned about intersectionality and what you've just done.